It appears that even if you already work in a hearing care clinic and your mom works there too, that it's still difficult to find opportunities to get the training that you need to move forward with your licensing process.
Really where I've struggled because I just find myself repeating. I've read this textbook a dozen times and I feel like there's obviously something I'm not going.
Such good intentions on everyone's side.
Yep.
It's just hard to do it. So this is the case for my student that I worked with this weekend. She has been working in a clinic for a year and a half now for a provider that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. He has loyal employees and goes far and beyond to provide resources to his employees for training. The best of intentions from every angle, but still very difficult to move forward. So this weekend, we spent some time working on an area where she is stuck. It's audiogram interpretation. So what I want to do is I just want to give you a little sneak peek of what we do with the Look Hear Career Accelerator, where we take concepts that she's memorized from her textbook and we're going to apply them in the process of performing a hearing evaluation at the most basic level and walk through those steps of making the proper decisions to make sure that the data she's collecting is valid. So come with me. Let's do that now and see what you think. One common exam that a lot of states require you to take is called an audiogram interpretation exam. And this is a focused competency exam that is meant to evaluate your ability to analyze audiometric data and make appropriate clinical decisions like what the next step in the process is in the test, whether or not you need to mask, if further testing is required. Basically, just making sure that you know how to verify that your test is valid so that you can move forward with a hearing aid selection and fitting. So my student that I was working with this weekend knows the textbook front to back. She can recite all the rules and principles and theory. But when it comes to being in a situation and knowing exactly what the next step is, that's where she struggles. So she knows the procedures and she knows the rules, but her issue is when to use them. And this is something that requires a lot of complex thinking. We're going to just start at the very beginning of an audiometric evaluation where we do an air conduction test on both ears and moving to bone conduction and just making some decisions along the way using an example. Let's just do that just to demonstrate the kind of stuff that we do. So let's look at this audiogram here. This is a basic air conduction test. It's very simplified. I'm not using very thorough data points here. It's just to demonstrate the concept. So the interoctaves here, I didn't do those. So simple data. Now, depending on where you are in your training, you may or may not know that the blue is the left ear, the X's are the left ear, and that the red is the right ear. These are the circles of the right ear. So this is an ear conduction test. So we're just testing what the person heard through the ear canal, right? In an air-filled space, what traveled through this air space, that's an air conduction test. So when we tested both ears, we got this data. Now, I ask you, do we need to mask for air? And here's the thing, we haven't tested bone conduction yet, right? And you may know that the rule for air conduction masking would be if there is a certain difference between the recorded air conduction thresholds for the test ear, the difference between that and the bone conduction test thresholds for the non-test ear. But we haven't tested bone yet. The only thing we've done is an air conduction test, all right? So with just that data, let's look at that and just ask the question. Do you know enough now to know whether or not you need to mask for air? Before you can answer that question, you have to know, you would ask me, well, it depends. What transducer are you using? Okay, so that moves us down to the next phase here. So the question is the person wearing headphones or inserts, ear insert earphones. Because when you have, and this is, let's go over intraoral attenuation. So that's going to be, if I played a tone at 60 decibels here, we're looking at 500 hertz. All right, if I played a tone at 60 decibels in the right ear, intraoral attenuation for headphones, meaning the headphones that cover up the mastoid bone in the ear canal and send the sound in that way. This is going to go into the right ear. That 60 decibel tone is going to go into the right ear, and it's going to cross to the left side of the head and lose 40 decibels along the way. Let's say this is right here. Just for better, this will be a better explanation. So let's say that we played a tone at 65 decibels, right? A 500 hertz tone at 65 decibels in the right ear. If it was headphones, that tone would cross over to the left ear, but it would lose 40 decibels along the way, meaning, let's see, 10, 20, 30, 40, meaning when it got to the left side of the head, it would be at 25 decibels. And at what point does the left ear hear a tone? At 20. So, is it possible that the left ear heard that tone that we played in the right ear? Yes, it is, because it needed it to be at least 20 decibels to hear it, and it's crossing over and getting there at 25. Yeah, it's possible. We don't even know the bone conduction scores yet, but we already know that there's enough difference to know that we would need to mask if it was headphones. And this is because we know that bone conduction thresholds can't be worse than ear conduction. All right, so we know that the crossover amount is going to be enough. That left ear could have heard that tone. All right. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you what would happen hypothetically here. If we were to mask the left ear, we're going to distract the left ear so we can see what the right ear actually hears. So let's say that once we masked that left ear, we actually got these thresholds for that right ear. So the right ear actually has higher thresholds than we originally thought. And we only know that because we distracted that left ear to make sure that this is accurate. Now, again, we didn't follow the rule that it's based on the difference between the bone conduction for the non-test ear, the left ear, and the right ear air conduction. We didn't even really follow that rule exactly, but we used logic to know that the bone conduction thresholds can't be lower than the air conduction thresholds. So the bone conduction thresholds have to at least be where these X's are, have to be at least there. So we knew enough to know that we should go ahead and do that masking. While we were doing the air conduction testing, we might as well go ahead and move forward and get it done, just get the accurate data and then move to bone. So here's another example we can talk about. We've got air conduction thresholds for both ears, and they are fairly close together. We've got about a 10 decibel difference between them. And the question is, do we need to mask for air? So do you have enough information to do that? No, you do not have enough information to know if you need to mask for air, because with the data that you have, there doesn't appear to be an opportunity for crossover. So, because there's not enough space between the thresholds, right, of the left and the right. So nothing's really going to make it across to the other side. So we would need to know the bone conduction thresholds to move forward with deciding whether or not we needed to do any masking. All right, so let's say, hypothetically speaking, now you should always mask bone conduction on both sides because there is no intraoral attenuation, and if you play a tone on one mastoid bone, the other side can hear it. You do want to mask both sides, but let's say, just for the sake of this demonstration, that we did not mask. All right, and we tested, let's say the person had indicated that their left ear was their better hearing ear. We've started testing with their left ear. So we needed more information. So now that we have the bone conduction thresholds for that quote unquote better hearing ear, what we see are a couple of things actually. First of all, we know for sure that we need to mask for air for this right ear because there is a possibility of crossover to the left cochlea, possibly. We don't know for sure, but it is possible. So we would need to distract that left ear and retest these air conduction data points to make sure they're accurate. So we know that, okay? Now, the other thing that we learn from this here is that you see the difference between the bone conduction measurements and the air conduction measurements of the left ear. Those are significant. So this is a definite case of we need to mask for bone. So we will be masking for bone to make sure that these are accurate as well. So let's go ahead and start we're going to go ahead and mask the left ear, and we're going to get those air conduction thresholds here. Now we're looking at the measured masked air conduction thresholds for the right ear, which appear to be higher than the originally documented air conduction threshold. So look at that. The person actually hears less out of that right ear than we thought, which if you did not mask in that situation, that person may be under amplified and their fitting would result in not enough sound stimulation. So are these accurate bone conduction thresholds? How do we know that? We know that there is no interoral attenuation from one side of the head to the other. So when we put that mastoid oscillator on one side, on the left side, it could have been the right side hearing it. We don't know for sure. So now we're going to mask for bone to get the accurate thresholds here for the left ear. Before I do that, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to take that oscillator that we had on the left ear and I'm going to flip it to the right ear and let's see what happens. Oh my goodness, when we put the bone oscillator on the right side and tested the right ear, it had the exact same results as the left. And we know that this is going to be the case because both sides hear it exactly the same. So how do we know this data is accurate? We don't. We're going to have to mask for bone. Okay? So let's start with the left ear. So now we have bone conduction thresholds for that left ear, and we see that they are the same as the originally measured bone conduction thresholds without masking. But without masking, you would not know for sure if those were accurate. It could have been inaccurate, so that's why we had to make sure. Because of the rule, the difference between the bone conduction measurement and the air conduction measurement in the same ear was more than 15 decibels. Now let's do the masked bone conduction for the right ear. So I'm going to distract the left ear and I'm going to check to see where the bone conduction thresholds are for the right ear. All right, so now we have the bone conduction thresholds for the right ear accurately measured because we distracted the left ear to see what the right ear was actually hearing. So look right here. You see this was the original bone conduction measurement for that right ear. We originally thought that the person had almost a purely conductive hearing loss based on those measurements, but it turns out the person has a pretty solid mixed loss because their cochlea did not respond until 40 decibels here at 500 hertz when we distracted the left ear. But when we had the left ear open to hear too, and we played a tone on the right mastoid bone, we put this mastoid oscillator on the right side, the left ear, because the left ear hears at 20 decibels, it heard that sound and responded. And so the patient pushed the button, said they heard the tone, and we had documented that they had heard it on the right side, but they actually did not. And the only way we could have figured that out was by masking. Okay, so now I've removed all of the noise and you can see what we're actually dealing with, and it appears to be that this person has a sensory neural hearing loss in their left ear right here. Okay, that appears to be mild to moderate, mild sloping to moderate, and then in their right ear they appear to have a moderate sloping to severe sensory neural hearing loss here. It's asymmetric. And both ears appear to have a conductive component of hearing loss. So 10, 20, about a 30 decibel loss in hearing due to some conductive factor in the right ear, and about the same, right? 10, 20, yeah. And about the same in the left ear. So it looks as though there is some symmetry there with both sides having this conductive component, but the sensory neural loss is what makes up the difference between the two ears. So we have a bilateral asymmetric sensory neural hearing loss with a conductive component in both ears. So that's where I'm going to stop today. I hope that you guys learned something from this, and I think that the most important takeaway is that, like my student from this weekend who studies and memorizes the principles and the concepts and knows everything in the book, it's not going to prepare you for making appropriate clinical decisions in a testing situation. So you do need to know in each step of that hearing evaluation what you need to do to verify that your data is accurate. Each test is unique, each test is different, and it's really important that you do this exercise continuously to develop that ability. That's all I want to say for now. I will see you on the next one.